There's a strength in silence that most people don't talk about. We live in a world where noise is power, where opinions are currency, and where validation often comes with a price tag. And in that world, silence is underrated. Silence isn't weakness, it's restraint. It's the ability to hold space for yourself when others would demand it for themselves. When we think of the moments that shake us, that make us feel small or insecure, it's easy to default to defending ourselves, to explaining ourselves, to making noise. But sometimes the greatest response is none at all. Silence is a tool of resilience. It says, I don't owe you anything. Silence says, I'm grounded in who I am, and I trust my own story more than anyone else's interpretation of it. Silence, at its core, is an act of courage. It requires the vulnerability to let go of the need for validation or approval. It requires us to stand in a place of discomfort, holding steady, and staying connected to our own sense of truth. In a culture that applauds loudness, it's an act of rebellion to choose quiet. To choose to not respond to every critique or question. To let your silence be a statement, a boundary that's both gentle and unbreakable. But it's important to note that silence is not about avoidance. It's not about shutting down or shrinking. Silence is strength. It is choosing, in a world that pulls us every which way, to stay rooted in our own sense of self-worth and identity. When we allow our silence to speak, we are signaling that our value is not conditional on others' perceptions. We're saying that we believe in our own power, our own worth, and our own voice, even if that voice isn't always heard. Confusing others with your silence isn't about playing games or withholding yourself. It's about setting boundaries, about knowing when to engage and when to conserve your energy. It's about saying to the world, I am here, I am whole, and I don't need to explain myself to anyone. Silence can be a tool for peace, for clarity, and for strength. So the next time someone questions your worth or doubts your abilities, remember that your silence can speak louder than any words ever could. Stand firm, hold your space, and trust that your silence has a power all its own. Silence has often been misunderstood as a sign of weakness, passivity, or submission, but it can be one of the most profound displays of strength and self-assurance. In a culture that values loudness, instant responses, and constant engagement, silence holds an unexpected power. It's a signal of self-control, a choice to be deliberate rather than reactive. When we respond to every critique, every doubt, or every instance where our value is questioned, we allow the world to set the terms of our worth. Silence disrupts that pattern. Instead of offering ourselves up for constant validation, silence places the power back within us. It demonstrates that our sense of self is not contingent upon the noise or opinions swirling around us. Silence, when chosen deliberately, is a form of resilience that speaks louder than words ever could. In moments of tension or conflict, we often feel compelled to fill the space, to defend ourselves or justify our actions. There's a natural human instinct to protect our image, to ensure that others see us as we want to be seen. But when we engage in this way, we're allowing external forces to pull us into their orbit. Silence disrupts this pull. It's a pause that allows us to remain steady and focused, even in the face of criticism. It's an assertion that we don't need to respond to every piece of feedback or every judgment that comes our way. When we stay silent, we're telling the world that our worth is not up for debate. This quiet confidence can be unsettling to others because it disrupts the usual dynamics of validation and approval. Silence is a declaration of self-assurance. By not responding to every opinion or critique, we convey that we are comfortable with who we are and where we stand. It's an act of grounding ourselves in our own story rather than letting others dictate the narrative. This form of strength can be disorienting for others, particularly in a world that thrives on validation and social feedback. But silence is not about rejecting others' opinions outright. It's about recognizing that we don't need external affirmation to feel whole or complete. When we choose to remain silent, we're asserting that we are at peace with ourselves and do not require constant reassurance from others. In many ways, silence can be a more powerful response than words. Words can often be misinterpreted, twisted, or misunderstood, especially in situations charged with emotion or judgment. Silence, however, is more difficult to manipulate. It leaves others to reflect on their own assumptions without the clarity of a rebuttal or justification. This reflection can be transformative, not only for the person choosing silence, but also for those who may feel entitled to a response. Silence shifts the focus back to the person who initiated the critique, creating a space for them to consider their words and actions more deeply. It places the onus back on them to examine their assumptions without the safety of a conversational exchange to deflect upon. Silence also embodies restraint and the ability to conserve our energy for things that truly matter. Not every critique or opinion deserves our attention or our emotional investment. By staying silent, we are choosing where to focus our energy, refusing to be drawn into battles that do not serve our growth or well-being. Silence is a boundary that we set to protect ourselves from unnecessary distractions or conflicts. It's a way of signaling that we value our peace of mind and self-respect more than we value the validation of others. In a world where we are constantly encouraged to defend, explain, and validate ourselves, silence can be a revolutionary act of self-care. Silence as strength is deeply rooted in the ability to hold one's own ground. It requires a certain level of self-knowledge and self-acceptance. To be silent when the world expects noise is to have a deep trust in oneself, to believe that our worth does not hinge on how others perceive us. This internal trust is what makes silence so powerful. It is not a silence born from fear or submission. It is a silence rooted in the belief that we are enough as we are. This is perhaps the greatest form of strength there is, to be so sure of one's own worth that there is no need to prove it to others. Silence also carries an element of mystery. When we don't respond in expected ways, people are left to wonder, to question, and to consider the implications of our quiet. This uncertainty can be unsettling because it disrupts the typical patterns of interaction. Silence becomes a tool that keeps people guessing, forcing them to recognize that they do not control our responses. This element of mystery gives us control over our narrative. It allows us to choose when and how we engage, if at all, preserving our power and autonomy. In choosing silence, we're practicing a form of resilience that goes against the grain. In a world that demands constant engagement, choosing silence shows a strength that isn't dependent on others' perceptions or validations. It's a statement of independence, a way of saying, I am here and I am enough. It's a quiet but profound act of defiance against a culture that insists our worth lies in others' hands. Silence, therefore, is not the absence of response, but the presence of inner strength, resilience, and self-assuredness. It's the strength to stand firm, unshaken by the noise around us, secure in our own sense of worth. Choosing silence is a powerful way to set boundaries. It can communicate a great deal without uttering a single word. Boundaries are essential for protecting our emotional and mental well-being, especially when we're confronted with situations or individuals who seek to diminish, question, or control us. In a society that often rewards immediate response, interaction, and even confrontation, silence disrupts the flow of expected behavior and establishes a clear boundary, saying, this is where I begin and this is where you end. It's a choice that can feel radical in its simplicity, and one that can communicate strength, self-respect, and resolve without needing to be explained or justified. When we choose silence, we're sending a message that we're not here to please everyone or to accommodate others' desires or criticisms. It's a way of protecting our own energy and sense of self, choosing not to spend precious resources in interactions that might leave us feeling depleted, frustrated, or misunderstood. Silence allows us to be intentional about where we place our focus and attention. Instead of being pulled into conflicts, misunderstandings, or others' agendas, we are able to center ourselves and choose a path that aligns with our values. By not responding immediately or at all, we communicate that we are not at the mercy of every expectation or demand others place upon us. The boundary of silence is particularly valuable in situations where people attempt to impose their views or judgments on us. Whether it's unsolicited advice, criticism, or outright negativity, these situations can erode our sense of peace if we're constantly engaging. By choosing silence, we assert that we are not obligated to explain ourselves, defend our choices, or respond to every piece of feedback that comes our way. Silence, in this sense, becomes a boundary that lets others know they do not have the right to access our inner world or dictate our responses. It's a subtle yet firm declaration of self-respect. Silence as a boundary also allows us to maintain a sense of inner calm. It's easy to get swept up in the urgency of others' emotions or needs, especially when we feel pressured to respond. But when we embrace silence, we create a buffer, a moment to pause and reflect rather than react. This pause gives us space to process our own feelings, understand our needs, and approach situations with a sense of clarity. It helps us maintain our equilibrium, preventing us from being carried away by the emotions or intentions of others. By choosing silence, we create an emotional boundary that preserves our inner calm and keeps us grounded. In many cases, silence is also an effective way to avoid escalating situations that could otherwise spiral out of control. When emotions run high, words can easily be misinterpreted or lead to further misunderstandings. In choosing silence, we're taking a step back, refraining from engaging in ways that could potentially make things worse. This choice can help prevent unnecessary conflict and allow others to reflect on their own behavior. Silence acts as a mirror, prompting others to examine their words and actions rather than becoming fixated on our responses. This, too, is a form of boundary setting, allowing others to confront their own behaviors without placing ourselves in a position where we feel obligated to manage or moderate their feelings. Silence also offers a way to maintain our dignity. When we choose not to engage in every debate or conflict, we're honoring our own worth. We're making it clear that we value ourselves enough not to be drawn into interactions that don't serve our well-being. This form of boundary is about self-respect. It's a reminder to ourselves that we are worth more than the opinions others may try to impose upon us. We protect our sense of self by not allowing our emotions to be manipulated by every external force. Silence reinforces the idea that we are whole and complete on our own and do not require external validation or approval to maintain our sense of self-worth. Silence as a boundary can be challenging for others to accept, especially in a culture where silence is often misinterpreted as disinterest, dismissal, or even disrespect. But the purpose of silence as a boundary isn't to punish or disregard others, it's to create a respectful space between ourselves and situations that don't serve our highest interests. It's about preserving our peace, conserving our energy, and staying aligned with what truly matters to us. Those who understand and respect us will recognize that our silence is an act of self-preservation and not a statement about them. Silence allows us to connect more deeply with ourselves. When we choose not to respond to every external pressure, we create an opportunity to listen to our own needs, values, and inner voice. We give ourselves the space to tune into our own wisdom, rather than being overwhelmed by external demands. This practice of listening inward helps us maintain our boundaries more effectively because it reminds us of what we truly value and why we're choosing silence in the first place. It's a way of honoring our own voice over the noise around us, a boundary that protects our relationship with ourselves. Silence as a boundary isn't about avoidance, it's about intentionality. It's about choosing where to direct our energy and attention, about deciding which battles are worth engaging in and which are best left alone. It's about creating a boundary that lets others know that we are not available for every argument or every attempt to impose expectations on us. In a world that often equates engagement with respect, silence challenges that assumption by demonstrating that self-respect sometimes means choosing not to engage at all. It's a profound act of boundary setting that allows us to move through life with greater peace, resilience, and self-assuredness. Choosing silence, especially in situations where a response is expected or even demanded, requires a level of courage that many overlook. We live in a world where validation and approval often come from immediate reactions, explanations, and vocal defenses of our thoughts and actions. Choosing silence goes against the grain of these social norms and requires us to step outside the comfort zone of reassurance and into the more vulnerable space of trusting ourselves without needing external validation. Silence, then, becomes an act of courage and intentional decision to place our faith in our own worth, perspectives, and boundaries, regardless of how others may perceive us. Silence calls us to face our own fears and insecurities. One of the deepest fears people encounter in remaining silent is the fear of being misunderstood or misjudged. It's natural to want to correct others when they make assumptions or draw conclusions about us. However, choosing not to respond requires us to be comfortable with the discomfort of letting those misunderstandings stand, knowing they do not define us. This is where courage comes in, trusting that we don't need to control others' perceptions to feel secure in who we are. It requires us to let go of the need to be seen in a certain way, to be right, or to be validated by others. Instead, we find the strength to let others hold their own perspectives, even if they clash with our reality. This type of silence isn't passive, it's a deliberate and courageous stance that communicates, I trust my truth, and I don't need your agreement to affirm it. In many ways, silence is about embracing our own vulnerability. When we choose to remain silent, especially in situations charged with tension or disagreement, we are exposing ourselves to the possibility that others may misinterpret our silence as weakness, agreement, or disengagement. Yet true courage lies in being vulnerable enough to risk these interpretations and to stand firm in the knowledge that our silence is rooted in our own self-worth. By choosing silence, we're choosing not to be swayed by others' expectations or judgments. We're accepting that our self-respect is more valuable than the comfort of immediate acceptance or understanding. This takes tremendous strength because it involves trusting in our own value even when others may not see it. Silence also challenges the social norms that equate loudness with strength. In a society where quick responses and vocal defenses are often seen as marks of confidence, choosing silence can be unsettling to others. There is an expectation that strength is about being assertive, speaking up, and proving ourselves to others. Silence, however, asks us to redefine what strength means. It challenges the notion that courage always needs to be loud or assertive. Instead, it shows us that there is immense bravery in holding our tongue, in choosing not to engage, and in allowing others to fill in the gaps without our influence. Silence demands that we find our courage within rather than looking for it in how others react to us. This inner courage is quiet but resolute. It doesn't require validation to know it exists. Silence, as a courageous act, also frees us from the constant need to justify our choices. Often we feel pressured to explain ourselves to make sure that others understand our motivations, intentions, and values. This can become exhausting, particularly when we are constantly trying to mold our words and responses to fit others' perspectives. Choosing silence allows us to step back from this cycle. It grants us the freedom to exist authentically, without feeling the need to defend or justify ourselves at every turn. This, however, requires the courage to face any discomfort that may arise from others' assumptions, to stand confidently in our own truths, and to trust that we don't owe anyone an explanation for our choices. In this way, silence empowers us to live more freely, untethered from the burden of always needing to be understood. Silence also calls for patience, which is another form of courage. When we choose to remain silent, especially in the face of adversity or criticism, we are exercising patience with ourselves and others. We're choosing not to jump to conclusions, not to react impulsively, and not to let others' words dictate our emotional responses. This patience allows us to consider our own feelings, needs, and boundaries before responding. It's a way of honoring our inner voice and giving ourselves time to process before engaging. Practicing this form of patience requires courage because it goes against the urge to react immediately. It asks us to be comfortable with the uncertainty that silence often brings and to trust that, in time, clarity will come, both to us and perhaps to others. Another aspect of silence's courage lies in its ability to foster self-awareness. When we choose not to respond immediately, we give ourselves space to reflect on our true motivations, emotions, and needs. Silence offers us a moment to step back and examine what we genuinely feel and want, rather than reacting based on social pressure or habit. This self-awareness can be uncomfortable, as it often brings to light insecurities, fears, or unhealed wounds that we might otherwise overlook in the rush to respond. Yet embracing this discomfort is an act of courage. It's an acknowledgement that facing our own truth, even if it's challenging, is more valuable than the comfort of reacting superficially or defensively. Silence as courage also paves the way for resilience. When we face challenging situations or criticism, choosing silence allows us to build a stronger sense of self-reliance. Instead of seeking immediate reassurance or validation from others, we're choosing to cultivate our own sense of inner strength. This resilience grows from the practice of trusting ourselves, of knowing that we can face adversity without needing to justify, explain, or defend every aspect of our identity or actions. It's a courageous stance that shows we are capable of standing strong in our values and beliefs, even in the face of doubt or opposition. Ultimately, silence as courage is about claiming our power and autonomy. It's about saying that we are whole and complete without needing others' approval or understanding. It's about valuing our inner peace, trusting our instincts, and knowing that we have the strength to endure moments of uncertainty. Silence isn't passive or weak, it's an active, powerful choice that requires a deep sense of self-assurance and bravery. When we choose silence, we are choosing to honor ourselves above the noise, to trust in our own worth, and to let our courage speak quietly but powerfully through our restraint. Silence as rebellion is about refusing to conform to the world's demands for constant interaction. We are continually told to explain ourselves, to engage in every debate, and to assert our opinions in order to maintain a sense of relevance. But silence allows us to detach from this cycle. It gives us permission to step back and say, I am choosing not to be drawn into every conversation. I don't need to justify myself to feel secure. By choosing silence, we resist the idea that our value is tied to the volume or frequency of our words. Instead, we are quietly declaring that our worth is intrinsic and doesn't require constant reinforcement. This choice can feel radical in a world that thrives on visibility and validation, where silence is often misinterpreted as weakness or disengagement. But for those who choose silence intentionally, it is an act of self-respect and resilience. In choosing silence, we are also challenging the notion that every emotion or opinion must be shared and validated publicly. There's an underlying expectation that transparency equates to authenticity, that sharing our thoughts and feelings openly proves that we are genuine. Silence, however, redefines authenticity by emphasizing introspection. It allows us to process our feelings privately, to hold our truths close, and to decide what we want to share and what we prefer to keep within. By doing this, we create an alternative model for authenticity, one that values the internal journey over external validation. This approach goes against the cultural grain, but it reinforces a sense of self-sovereignty. We're taking back control over our emotions and narratives, choosing to share only when we feel it serves a purpose, rather than because the world demands it. Silence also resists the idea that our thoughts and actions need immediate justification. The expectation to constantly explain or defend oneself is pervasive, whether in personal interactions or public discourse. There's a cultural assumption that being silent in the face of criticism implies agreement or weakness, as though our silence makes us passive. Yet, in choosing silence, we're challenging that assumption. We're making a conscious choice to not engage with every critique, knowing that we don't owe anyone an explanation or defense. This act of selective engagement is deeply rebellious because it prioritizes our inner peace over the pressure to respond. Silence in this context becomes a boundary, a way to say, I'm confident in my truth and don't need to prove it to you. In a society where oversharing is often mistaken for connection, silence fosters genuine connection with ourselves. It creates a space for self-reflection, allowing us to reconnect with our own values, beliefs, and priorities. By choosing silence, we're resisting the impulse to seek external input and validation before we've even defined our own stance. This self-connection is rebellious in its focus on internal validation. Instead of seeking reassurance or validation from others, we're affirming ourselves. We're saying that our opinions are worth and our values are complete and valid without external approval. This inner confidence disrupts the status quo because it allows us to feel whole and empowered from within, not reliant on others' perceptions to define our worth. Silence questions the very notion of strength as it's often defined by society. Strength is typically associated with being outspoken, assertive, and forceful. Silence, however, reveals a different kind of strength, one that doesn't need to be seen or heard to be felt. Silence demonstrates restraint, self-control, and patience, qualities that are often overlooked but are immensely powerful. This form of strength is subtle and doesn't require validation from others. It doesn't seek attention or approval, and that's exactly what makes it rebellious. It resists societal pressure to constantly prove oneself, to be vocal and visible, by showing that strength can also be quiet, intentional, and grounded. Choosing silence also protects our mental and emotional energy. In a culture that encourages engagement at every opportunity, silence acts as a filter, allowing us to preserve our focus for what truly matters. By choosing not to react to every stimulus, we create space to focus on our own priorities and values. This preservation of energy is a form of rebellion against the demands of a world that constantly pulls us in different directions, seeking our attention and engagement. It's a reminder that we have the power to choose what deserves our energy and that we are not obligated to respond to every invitation for interaction. This control over our own focus is an act of autonomy and self-respect. Silence can also be unsettling to others because it defies expectations. When we choose silence, people are often left to fill in the gaps themselves, wondering what we think or feel. This uncertainty can make others uncomfortable because they are not used to a lack of response. Our silence forces them to reflect, to sit with their own assumptions, and to confront the discomfort of not knowing. In this way, silence subtly challenges the dynamics of control in conversations and interactions. We are shifting the balance, taking back control over our responses, and disrupting the expectation that we will always be available, reactive, and explainable. This shift is a quiet form of rebellion that upholds our autonomy and requires others to respect it. Silence as rebellion allows us to resist the pressure to fit into predefined roles or expectations. By choosing not to speak, we're challenging the idea that our identity is defined by how others perceive or label us. We're not giving others the information they need to place us in a specific box, and in doing so, we maintain our freedom to be whoever we choose. Silence allows us to be complex, multifaceted, and unknowable, resisting the urge to conform to narrow definitions of who we're supposed to be. In this way, silence upholds our individuality and authenticity in a world that often seeks to categorize and simplify. Choosing silence cultivates resilience and patience. In a fast-paced world where immediacy is often prized, taking the deliberate path of silence allows us to strengthen our ability to withstand pressure, remain calm under adversity, and let clarity emerge before reacting. This choice to stay silent in challenging moments is not an act of passivity, but rather an intentional and resilient practice that shows our commitment to staying grounded and in control. By resisting the urge to respond impulsively, we build a quiet inner strength that is both steady and unwavering, helping us navigate life's uncertainties with greater confidence and balance. Silence teaches us patience by helping us separate the temporary from the lasting. In any given situation, emotions, opinions, and pressures are often high in the immediate moment. When we respond without reflection, we may be reacting to things that, in time, will lose their impact or importance. Choosing silence allows us to sit with these shifting dynamics, acknowledging them without letting them dictate our response. Over time, this practice teaches us that we don't need to give in to the urgency of every situation. Instead, we can allow emotions and circumstances to settle, revealing a truer understanding of what we need to address and what we can let pass. This patience is a form of resilience, as it trains us to withstand immediate pressures, knowing that time will often provide the perspective we need. Choosing silence also builds our resilience against external pressures to conform, agree, or respond in a particular way. In many social situations, there is a subtle expectation to validate others' views, to react in ways that match the tone of a conversation, or to provide reassurance by aligning with others. Silence, however, allows us to disengage from these expectations. It's a way of saying, I am choosing to be here in my own way, in my own time, and on my own terms, by not being swayed by every social cue or demand. We cultivate an inner strength that is independent of external approval. This resilience becomes a powerful tool that helps us navigate various interactions with a sense of autonomy and self-trust. Patience in silence also develops our ability to handle discomfort. It's natural to feel uneasy when we're silent in situations where a response is anticipated, whether it's in a conversation, a conflict, or even a moment of social awkwardness. Yet staying silent through discomfort is an act of resilience. It builds our tolerance for situations that are out of our control, strengthening our ability to remain steady even when we feel pressured to break the silence. This tolerance is a fundamental part of resilience that allows us to face discomfort head-on without retreating or compromising our values. Over time, our capacity to handle discomfort grows, enabling us to navigate life's inevitable uncertainties and challenges with a greater sense of ease and self-assurance. Another powerful aspect of silence is its ability to create space for reflection, an essential component of resilience. When we remain silent, we give ourselves the opportunity to examine our own emotions, motivations, and intentions before taking action. This internal reflection allows us to better understand ourselves, our needs, and our boundaries, empowering us to make decisions that are thoughtful rather than reactive. By regularly engaging in this process of self-reflection through silence, we build resilience against the distractions and demands that can easily pull us off course. We become more grounded in who we are and less susceptible to being swayed by external circumstances. This inner alignment reinforces our ability to stay true to our values and goals, even when we face challenges or opposition. Silence also offers a unique form of strength in situations where we need to hold our ground. When we choose not to respond, especially in moments of tension or disagreement, we're asserting a quiet confidence in our position. This act of restraint demonstrates that we are not easily shaken or intimidated by others' demands for reaction. Instead, we remain firm, knowing that we don't need to explain or defend ourselves at every turn. This resilience allows us to protect our peace and maintain our boundaries without feeling the need to justify them to others. Over time, this quiet strength becomes a part of who we are, empowering us to face challenges and criticisms without losing our sense of calm or self-assurance. In choosing silence, we also strengthen our capacity to let go of things that do not serve us. When we're silent, we practice detachment from external expectations, judgments, and even outcomes. This ability to let go is a core aspect of resilience that allows us to move forward without being weighed down by every minor setback or criticism. Instead, we're able to focus on what truly matters to us, letting go of distractions or negativity that could otherwise drain our energy. This practice of releasing through silence builds a mental and emotional resilience that helps us stay focused on our path, even when circumstances aren't ideal. By choosing what to engage with and what to release, we build a stronger, more resilient mindset. Finally, silence fosters resilience by teaching us to prioritize our inner peace over external noise. When we're silent, we're making a deliberate choice to honor our own well-being and mental clarity. This act of self-preservation isn't selfish, it's a necessary part of building resilience. In a world filled with constant demands, interruptions, and opinions, silence becomes a sanctuary where we can recharge, reconnect, and refocus. By prioritizing our peace, we're better equipped to handle whatever comes our way. We learn that resilience doesn't require constant action or response sometimes. The strongest thing we can do is to hold on to our inner stillness and let it guide us through life's storms. Choosing silence ultimately helps us develop a steady, resilient foundation that isn't easily shaken. Through silence, we cultivate patience, build self-reliance, and reinforce our ability to remain centered regardless of external circumstances. This resilience is not the loud, assertive kind that society often celebrates, but a quieter, more enduring strength that allows us to stay true to ourselves. In a world that prizes instant reactions and loud displays of strength, silence reminds us that true resilience is often found in calmness, patience, and the courage to listen before acting. It's a strength that grows gradually but remains unwavering, helping us face life's challenges with grace, dignity, and a sense of unshakable peace. Choosing silence cultivates self-awareness, an essential foundation for personal growth and fulfillment. In a society that encourages constant interaction, conversation, and expression, silence offers a counterbalance. It provides a reflective space where we can turn inward, away from the noise of others' opinions, judgments, and expectations, to connect with our own thoughts, emotions, and values. Through silence, we learn to sit with ourselves, confronting our truths, exploring our motivations, and gaining clarity about who we are and what truly matters to us. This process fosters a deeper sense of self-awareness, allowing us to engage with the world from a place of authenticity and self-assuredness. Silence helps us become more attuned to our inner world by offering a pause, a moment free from external stimuli. When we stop filling our lives with noise, we can listen to what lies beneath the surface. This pause helps us notice subtle emotions such as discomfort, resentment, or joy that we might otherwise overlook in the rush of daily life. For example, taking time to sit in silence allows us to ask questions like, why am I feeling this way? Or what is this emotion trying to tell me? These questions deepen our self-understanding and encourage us to look beyond surface reactions to identify the root causes of our feelings. This is self-awareness at its core, the ability to understand our emotions and motivations rather than simply reacting to them. Silence also fosters a greater understanding of our values and beliefs. In a culture that is often loud with opinions and perspectives, it's easy to internalize others' beliefs without realizing it. We may adopt views from society, family, or friends simply because we're constantly exposed to them. However, silence gives us the space to sift through these influences, identifying what genuinely resonates with us and what feels imposed or inauthentic. By stepping back from external input, we can reflect on what we truly value, creating a stronger foundation for decision-making and goal setting. This level of self-awareness gives us a sense of direction and purpose that is rooted in our own beliefs, not just the expectations of those around us. Through silence, we also gain insight into our patterns and habits. When we are constantly in motion, reacting to every situation without reflection, it's easy to fall into habits without questioning their impact on our well-being. Silence invites us to observe ourselves more objectively, noticing which patterns serve us and which do not. We might realize, for instance, that we tend to avoid difficult conversations, that we often prioritize others' needs over our own, or that we seek validation from external sources rather than trusting our own judgment. This process of observation fosters self-awareness, helping us identify areas for growth and giving us the opportunity to make conscious choices to improve our lives. Silence also enables us to confront our fears and insecurities, often lurking beneath the surface but influencing our behaviors in profound ways. When we are constantly engaged in conversation or surrounded by distractions, we can avoid facing these vulnerabilities. However, in silence, there is no escape from our inner fears or doubts. Confronting these aspects of ourselves can be uncomfortable, but it is essential for growth. By sitting in silence and allowing these insecurities to arise, we become more aware of how they influence our thoughts, choices, and interactions. This awareness is transformative because it allows us to work through our fears rather than being controlled by them, empowering us to live more freely and authentically. Silence also sharpens our intuition, helping us make decisions that align with our true selves. When we're constantly taking in information, opinions, and feedback from others, it's easy to become disconnected from our own instincts. Silence reconnects us with this inner guidance system, allowing us to access a deeper, more intuitive understanding of what feels right for us. This intuition is a vital part of self-awareness. It enables us to make choices that resonate with our inner values and needs rather than relying solely on external input. By listening to this inner voice, we cultivate a self-trust that strengthens our sense of identity and direction, providing a reliable foundation for navigating life's uncertainties. Finally, silence encourages us to develop a more mindful approach to life. By spending time in quiet reflection, we become more present to each moment, appreciating the richness of our experiences rather than rushing from one thing to the next. This mindfulness deepens our self-awareness by helping us tune in to how each moment feels, what it teaches us, and how it contributes to our growth. It allows us to savor life's simple joys and find meaning in everyday experiences, creating a sense of gratitude and contentment that enriches our lives.